Conservatives will always say, well, it's going to hurt poor people. Bullshit. What they're truly worried about is this amorphous concept called sovereignty. That's what they're really worried about.
Deloitte is the largest professional service network in the world, headquartered in London. It is also one of the big four global accounting companies offering audit, consulting, risk advisory, tax and legal services to corporate clients. With 1/3 professionals operating on those fronts worldwide, and as the third largest privately owned company in the US, Deloitte is a behemoth.
Hold on. Oh God, this is going to be... Zerka on your content.
That goes back to the argument that we were making, which is like, if you're going to go all the way, if you want to be at the top, you kind of have to play their game.
Look at Piker. Look,
Piker's miserable. Piker's so miserable, dude. Holy shit.
The difference from Piker and Destiny is Destiny leaks a lot of truth because that's how he is. I know Destiny's not always honest, but when you compare him to Hassan, he looks very noble, right?
Yeah.
Like Hassan can look you in the face and say, I'm self-made. He can look you in your face and do that.
I actually don't mind Destiny that much. Like my biggest problem with Destiny is like his takes on religion and like his takes on like international politics, right? But like when it comes to interpersonal stuff, when it comes to like just living life, I don't think he's that wrong.
He's a pro-Russian dude, 100%.
He has some life experience that can like confirm what he's saying. But Hassan, I feel like just says whatever his chat wants.
Yeah, well, I mean, Destiny's also fighting degeneracy that like he'll have months and months where he's career-oriented and doing good, and then months and months of scandals and hooking up with bitches and headaches and, you know, all that shit that he doesn't need. And it's like a vicious cycle, right? But you can always see when Destiny's based because there's no bitches around and he's just getting high views and just working hard.
He's kind of being based right now. I don't know if you've been paying attention to his info stuff.
He's killing
it. He's actually doing really good lately.
Yeah, I talked to him recently and, yeah.
Oh, you guys talk offline?
Yeah, a little bit. Cause,
that's cool.
Yeah, I actually miss the guy now because I'm like, you know, I don't watch Twitch.
No, I believe that, yeah.
I spend 4 minutes to tune into Kiana's thing, and then I get bored and I just turn it off. And then, yeah, if Destiny came back, I think I'd go back to watching Twitch, all right? I think I'd watch his shit.
Yeah, he's actually the only like YouTube person that like I watch clips of. Like anytime he posts something, I'll usually, not all the time because some of it's stupid, but for the most part, when he posts stuff, I'll watch it. He has good conversations with people, especially nowadays where like I think what happened to him is he like saw how crazy things are getting, especially on the far left side of things, and he's like, hold on, I need to bring things back to the middle a little bit.
But didn't we?
I respect him for being able to do that.
We all predicted the left's going to eat him. We used to joke.
Yeah,
about it.
Yeah. I remember saying it like a couple years ago.
Yeah, he had the idea that since he defended them for 10 years, that they're not going to be snakes.
Yeah, it's funny because like as soon as he started trying to be like an ally, especially to like the LGBTQ stuff, as soon as he went really hard on that side of the content, they like picked him apart for all of that because it's impossible to be right when it comes to that stuff.
No, it's crazy. When you look at the LGBTQ, all that like hardcore emotional stuff is not actually in the real world. It's internet. Like if you've ever worked with gay people, they're nothing like the internet is this hyper. If you're a part of a group on the internet, you turn into like this high.
Okay, I'm good. All right, sorry. Okay. Peterson's well-written, well-researched message. Okay, sorry, let's start this again.
Is the largest professional service network in the world, headquartered in London. It is also one of the big four global accounting companies offering audit, consulting, risk advisory, tax and legal services to corporate clients. With 1/3 professionals operating on those fronts worldwide, and as the third largest privately owned company in the US, Deloitte is a behemoth with numerous...
Is behemoth like an unbelievably and previously unknown way of pretentiously saying behemoth? Is that actually an actual way to say, is behemoth? Is that a real pronunciation? Am I crazy, or it's another mythical creature? Okay, maybe it's a way to say it.
And far-reaching tentacles. In short, it's an entity we should all know about, not least because such enterprises no longer limit themselves to their proper bailiwick, profit-centered business strategizing, say, but consciously or not, have assumed the role as counselors to globalists whose policies have sparked considerable unrest around the world. If you're seeking the cause of the Dutch agriculture and fisheries protests, the Canadian trucker convoy, or before that, the rise of the so-called Yellow Jackets in France, the farmer rebellion in India a few years ago, the recent catastrophic collapse of Sri Lanka or the energy crises in Europe and Australia, you can instruct yourself by the recent pronouncements from Deloitte. While not directly responsible, they offer an insight into the elite groupthink that has triggered these events, into the cabal of centralizing globalist utopians operating in the media, corporate, and government fronts, wielding a nightmarish vision of environmental apocalypse.
Okay.
Outlandish claims. In May of this year, Deloitte released a clarion call to precipitous action, trumpeting the climate emergency that currently confronts us, called The Turning Point, a global summary. It is a stellar example of the kind of thinking characteristic of the European Union's bureaucratic overreach that generated Brexit, a very good decision on the part of the Brits, in my view,
Yeah.
and one that is now threatening the very survival of that self-same EU. The report opens with two claims. First, that the storms, wildfires, droughts, downpours, and floods around the globe in the last 18 months are unique and unprecedented. A dubious claim. And implicitly, that the science is now at a point where we can say, without doubt, that experts can and must model the entire ecology and economy of the planet, and that we must modify everyone's behavior moving forward by hook or by crook to avoid what would otherwise be the most expensive environmental and social catastrophe in history. The Deloitte models posit that climate impacts could affect global economic output and offer the following figures that unchecked climate change will cost us. $178 trillion over the next 50 years. That's $25,000 per person, to put it in human terms.
Sorry.
Who dares deny such facts, stated so mathematically, so precisely, so scientifically? Let's update Mark Twain's famous dictum. There are lies, damned lies.
And statistics.
Statistics.
And what's the thing he's going to add? And fuck, I can't even imagine it. Big media, environmental claims, global warming facts, scientific facts. What's he going to say?
And computer models.
Fuck!
Computer model does not mean data. And even data does not mean fact or real world. Computer model means at best hypotheses posing as mathematical fact. No real scientist ever says, follow the science. Yet, this is exactly what bodies such as the EU consistently pronounce, pushing for collectivist solutions that often and inevitably do more harm than good. Solutions in sovereignty. What might we rely on instead to guide us forward in these times of accelerating trouble and possibility? Valid authority rests in the people. Truly valid structures of authority are local, not centralized for reasons of efficiency and emergency. This must not become the generation of yet another top.
Did drugs rot his brain? Will you turn like this in 20 years? It feels like every time he speaks now, it feels like a 19-year-old trying to write a villain in a Harry Potter fanfic. That feels like what he's going for with every single sentence. It's so over the top. And he's not even saying anything of substance.
Down Tower of Babel that will not solve our problems, just as similar attempts have failed to solve our problems in the past. Ask yourself, are these Deloitte models, which are supposed to guide all the important decisions we make about the economic security and opportunity of families and the structures of our civil societies, accurate enough even to give those who employ them any edge whatsoever, say, in predicting the performance of a stock portfolio? One based on green energy, say, over the upcoming years. The answer is
No.
no.
I like the pause between everyone. Why would you think that being able to predict some system like a climate means that you should necessarily be able to predict, like, that doesn't logically follow. Oh, you're telling me you can predict the climate? Well, then predict the stock market. Like, I don't know if A follows from B there, my friend. Or B follows from A, I should say.
How do we know? Because if such accurate models existed and were implemented by a company with Deloitte's resources and reach, Deloitte would soon have all the money. That is never going to happen. The global economy, let alone the environment, is simply too complex to model. It is for this reason, fundamentally, that we have and require a free market system. The free market is the best model of...
Wouldn't you be able to predict certain types of stocks, such as oil or renewables, though? There are so many variables. Markets are very chaotic, as in prone to sensitivity inputs. There's a lot of stuff that could change. And also, a lot of future climate stuff might already be priced into current models, too. The idea that, like, just because you have some model of the future, you can, like, make money off the stock market, that doesn't necessarily follow. There's a lot of reasons why that could actually be the opposite. It's just...
of the environment we can generate. Let me repeat that with a codicil. Not only is the free market the best model of the environment we can generate, it is and will remain the best model that can, in principle, ever be generated.
Wow, OMW, thanks for 5 gifted subs in YouTube chat.
With its widely distributed computations, constituting the totality of the choices of 7 billion people, it simply cannot be improved upon, certainly not by presumptuous, power-mad globalist utopians who think that hiring someone, mysteriously manipulating a few carefully chosen numbers, and then reading the summarized output means genuine contact with the reality of the future and the generation of knowledge unassailable on both the ethical and the practical front. The impact of delusional thinking. Why is this a problem? Why should you care? Well, the saviors at Deloitte admit that there will be a short-term cost to implementing their cure, which is, by the way, net zero emissions by 2050, an utterly preposterous and inexcusable goal, both practically and conceptually. This, by the way, is a goal...
Okay, you have to stop trying to do two things. Earlier he said, like, something happens sometimes and inevitably. Well, if it's inevitable, it's not sometimes, it's always. And now we just said something is impossible practically and conceptually. Well, conceptually, I can think of 50 million ways we could conceptually be at net zero emissions by 2050. One is with some totalitarian world government. Second is nuclear fucking war. It's not conceptually impossible. It feels like he's voshifying his statements. He's like adding in words to like make it sound deeper than it actually is. Okay? You can just say 1 or 2 adjectives. It's fine. You don't have to have 3 or 4 for every fucking sentence you give.
Identical to that adopted last week by the utterly delusional leaders of Australia, who additionally committed that resource-dependent and productive country to a 40% plus decrease by 2005 standards in greenhouse gas emission within the impossible time frame of 8 years. This will devastate Australia, as the framers of such plans, with their "it justifies everything" emergency, know, and even somewhat admit to knowing. Here is the confession, couched in bureaucratic doublespeak from the Deloitte consultants. During the initial stages, the combined cost of the upfront investments in decarbonization, coupled with the already locked-in damages of climate change, would temporarily lower economic activity compared to the current emissions-intensive path. The omniscient planners then attempt to justify this with the standard empty threats and promises. The suffering is certain, the benefits ethereal. those most exposed to the economic damages of unchecked climate change would also have the most to gain from embracing a low emissions future. Really, tell that to the African and Indian populations in the developing world, lifted from poverty by coal and natural gas. And think, really think about
guys.
this statement.
Think about this one, guys. Bet you didn't think about this one. Hit us.
Existing industries would be reconstituted as a series of complex, interconnected, emissions-free energy systems. Energy, mobility, industry, manufacturing, food and land use, and negative emissions. That sounds difficult, don't you think?
Impossible even, Doctor.
To rebuild everything at once, and better, without breaking everything. Fixing everything in a few decades in a blindly panicked rush while demonizing anyone who dares object. And what will it take to do so? Here's the most alarming part.
Okay.
Nothing more than, quote, a coordinated transition that will require governments, along with the financial services and technology sectors, to catalyze, facilitate, and accelerate progress, foster information flows across systems, and align individual incentives with collective goals. A clearer statement of totalitarian inclination could hardly be penned.
Okay. There's nothing mysterious about a bunch of people saying, hey, we need to do something to help climate change in the future. If we truly believe that to be a big problem. Well, that's going to be kind of difficult because there's a lot of incentives to using cheap but dirty energy. That's true. If we wanted to make it so that alternative energy sources were more attractive, there'd have to be some kind of global coordinated effort to ensure that some people aren't motivated to use cheap and dirty energy producing methods versus other people that would use more expensive energy producing methods and then would be like non-competitive. Sure, requires some level of global coordination. I think one of the chief criticisms that I can remember, could be wrong, but I can remember, one of the chief criticisms of global climate policy historically has always been the wicked exception that developing countries have gotten. That India and China are able to skirt by in the most dirty energy ways possible, while larger players and more first world countries like Western Europe, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, we're kind of forced to be held to a higher standard. It's like, well, hold on. Everything I make in my country is 10x more expensive because I've got to pay my workers more, and because I've got to be careful with how I pollute. That's bullshit. And these countries get away with doing like insane shit. That's fucked up. Obviously, you need globally coordinated incentive structures and globally coordinated action to deal with a global problem. Otherwise, the negative externalities of any energy project are always going to prohibit your ability to make any progress when it comes to global problems. That's like obvious. It's not even like a controversial statement. Like that's obviously true. But everything is like so conspiratorial. Like
certain outcomes versus predicted outcomes. The one thing the Deloitte models guarantee...
Hold on. His main criticism is that this transition will come at the cost of poor people. Lies. That is bullshit. Conservatives will say that, okay? And I'm not doing the straw man. I'll tell you what's actually happening. And any honest conservative will tell you as much. Conservatives will always say, well, it's going to hurt poor people. Bullshit. What they're truly worried about is this amorphous concept called sovereignty. That's what they're really worried about. They want the freedom to pollute how they want. They want the freedom to burn whatever energy they want. And they want the freedom to have their country be independent in energy ways that can only be achieved right now through like more drilling and more energy policies that allow us to like burn fossil fuels. That's the true reason. Anybody that's like, oh, what about poor people? Bullshit. You don't give a fuck about poor people. When you're talking about green energy and shit, I don't believe that for a second. It's the dumbest thing in the world. If for no other reason than because like massive climate change, if it does happen across, or I could say the third is they don't believe climate change is real at all, which there's probably still some people who think that. Because if massive climate change did happen, poor people are going to be the ones that are the most affected. Arguably, they're the ones right now that are being affected, you know, more in places like Seattle or London or places that are getting really hot that traditionally weren't. But I think it's always a question of sovereignty or freedom from weird government energy policies than it is about like helping some particular class of people.
Is that if we do what they recommend, we will definitely be poorer than we would have been otherwise for an indefinite but hypothetically transitory period. Yet, any reduction in economic output, however temporary and necessary, will be purchased at the cost of the lives of those who are barely making it now. Period. Have you all noticed that food has become much more expensive? That shelter has become much more expensive?
The food stuff is inflation related for sure. I don't know what our food, I'd have to break into the CPI if somebody could tell me. I don't know if food is truly like inflated massively over an appreciable time span. I don't think that food is typically what is not affordable to people in the Western world. We don't have affordability issues with food. If you walk around, no offense, but like you get a lot of fat motherfuckers in the Western world, especially poor people are fat as fuck. Food is not the issue right now, okay? Housing is definitely an issue, but if anything, that has more to do with how we lay out our cities and how we construct things. That's not a matter of like some global elite conspiring to make things less affordable or whatever, but.
That energy is more expensive? That many consumer goods are simply unavailable? Can you not see that this is going to get worse if the Deloitte-style moralists have their way? How much short-term pain are you going to be required to sustain? Decades worth? All your life and the life of your children? It's very likely for your own benefit. Remember that. And all this painful privation is not only not going to save the planet, it's going to make it far worse. I worked for a UN subcommittee that helped prepare the 2012 report to the Secretary General on Sustainable Development. Whether or not it was a good idea to contribute to such a thing is a separate issue. I do believe, at least, that the report would have been much more harmful than it was without the input of the Canadian contingent. We scrubbed away several layers of globalist utopianism and Cold War era conceptualization and cynicism. That was something. I garnered a key and crucial insight from the several years' work devoted to my contribution. I learned that the fastest and most certain pathway forward to the future we all want and need, peaceful, prosperous, beautiful, is through the economic elevation of the absolutely poor. Richer people care about the environment, which is, after all that is outside the primary and fundamental concern of those desperate for their next meal. Make the poor rich, and the planet will improve, or at least get out of their way while they try to make themselves rich. Make the poor poorer, and this is the concrete plan, remember, and things will get worse, perhaps worse beyond imagining. Observe the chaos in Sri Lanka, if you need proof. There are clearly more important priorities than costly and ineffective emergency climate change reductions. Bjorn Lomborg's work, among others, such as Marion Tupy and Matt Ridley, has demonstrated that other pressing problems could and should take political and economic priority from the perspective of good done per dollar spent. Money could and should be spent, for example, to ensure the current health and therefore future productivity and environmental stewardship of currently poor children in developing countries, for example. How about attending to remediation of the actual world of pain and deprivation of such children, rather than saving the hypothetical world and the hypothetical world of future children in abstraction?
True.
Stirrings of revolt.
Not really, but.
Citizens are waking up to this. Dutch farmers and fishermen are rising up. Canadian truckers are pushing back. And such protests are spreading and increasing in intensity, as they should. Why? Because Deloitte consultants and like-minded centralists are pushing things too far. It will not produce the results they are hypothetically intending. This agenda, justified by emergency, will instead make everyone poorer, particularly those who are already poor. This use of emergency force will instead make the lives of the working men upon whom we all depend for our daily bread and shelter more difficult and less rewarding. Finally, this use of emergency force will also make
You know what's kind of weird? What's kind of funny? In like a weird kind of like post-apocalyptic dystopian novel kind of way, a lot of these guys feel kind of religious, you know? Like, it's funny because they accuse progressivism of being religious, and I think it kind of is a little bit. I think it does feel like a religion sometimes. You've got strict holy texts that you have to adhere to that are very resistant to change, or if you question things, you get ostracized or executed for apostasy, and you've got all these parallels you could draw between like progressive orthodoxy and religion. But I think these guys on the right do it as well. And he fancies himself a pastor right now. This is what it feels like. I don't know if you guys have been to church before, but I feel like I'm in mass right now. My pastor is giving like an impassioned sermon right now, trying to preach to us about the evils in the world and how to guide us and dictate. I don't know. It feels kind of cringe to me, but like. There's some funny world where you write like a dystopian novel, and in the future there's no religion, everybody's like an atheist, but there's like 5 new churches that have opened up that are all like a-religious in nature. I know that he is religious, but like obviously he's not preaching a particular like theistic or theological religion right now. He's not talking about God, but it all still feels like very religious in terms of like delivery and aesthetic. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but just interesting.
Environment worse.
What even is Peterson's ideology? At its root, honestly, from what I've gathered, like listening to him recently, he kind of just sounds like a libertarian. Like he just wants like freedom and sovereignty for everybody, and that's kind of like his big kick lately. That's kind of what it feels like at its simplest, but.
Not better. Why? If you wreak your
Yeah, I know, but no one's addressing it, and rich people like Destiny are just saying it's not that big a deal when that could be the difference between a family eating a decent meal every night or not. What is this guy saying? Groceries cost like 20% more than they did before. Of course, it's a big deal for people living paycheck to paycheck. Okay.
Temporary economic havoc to eventually remediate the world. Those whom you sacrifice so casually in the attempt will descend into chaos.
I have to be careful not to project my experiences too much. I should just go mean and talk to more poor people. My issue when I was poor, I just don't remember this. And I could be wrong, or maybe I had a unique experience being poor. I just never remember food being the thing that was always the issue. My huge bills were my car and my house or apartment. Those things dwarfed everything else. Those are the 2 things that fucked me the hardest. And then any maintenance issues that came up related to them. So like a flat tire, for me, a flat tire could be like a month's worth of groceries to me, basically. Or if you break a wheel, you're fucked. Any car maintenance, those were always like the worst things. Or like if you had to do like housing maintenance stuff. These things dwarfed every other expense. And I always felt like I wasted money on food too. Like, because I would always go to Taco Bell or McDonald's to eat, and it'd probably be cheaper to buy groceries, but I was just too lazy. I didn't want to. But I don't know. If you've got like a family of 4, it can probably get tough, but I don't know, man. I could be biased, but like I worked at McDonald's. I saw poor people in the casino. Like in the United States, poor people are always fat. They just are. There was a homeless lady that lived out of her car that worked with us at McDonald's. I remember. She was fucking huge. This lady weighed like 500 fucking pounds. Maybe it's not always like that. Maybe I just have a selection of experiences that have made me a little bit biased. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to say that my experiences are right and your experiences are wrong, because other people can have different types of experiences. But when people talk about poor people in the United States, I always feel like they give this idea like poor people are starving to death. They can't they can't afford food or whatever. And that was never my experience. I feel like my bigger expenses were always things related to housing or things related to my car. Those were like the two things that kicked my ass the most every single fucking time. And then going out and having fun, which could be really expensive if you like go drinking or go to the movies or anything like that. But
in that chaos, they will then, by necessity, turn their attention to matters of immediate survival, and in a manner that will stress and harm the complex ecosystems and economies that can only be maintained with the long-term view that prosperity and nothing else makes possible. Critics of my view will say, we have to accept limits to growth. Fine, accept them. Personally, abandon your position of planet-devouring wealthy privilege. Join an ascetic order. Graze with the cattle. Or if that's too much, and it probably is, then purchase an electric car if you want one, but no diesel-powered emergency backup vehicle or electric-powered generator for you. Buy some stock in Tesla. That's probably the best bet on that front. But you don't approve of the likes of Elon Musk, do you? Stop flying. Stop driving, for that matter. Get on your bike instead in your three-piece business suit. In the winter, if you dare, I'll splash you with icy and salty slush as I drive by in my evil but warm Ford Bronco SUV and help you derive the consequent delicate pleasure of your own narcissistic martyrdom. Save the planet with your own choices. But quit demanding that the rest of us blindly follow your diktats. Quit it.
I feel we need to go on another league arc. I get frustrated when people should be smarter than this. This is just like such a boring, you're not actually engaged. Like the problem with public policies, you kind of need the whole public to do it for it to be effective. This idea of like, oh, you want to fix climate change? Well, why don't you stop driving? Like, okay, well, that doesn't really solve the problem, does it, bucko? Oh, you want to help the poor? Well, why don't you pay more taxes? Okay, well, you know, I can't do it alone, buddy. Usually when we're talking about government policy, it's something that all of society kind of sort of has to be bought in on. It can't just be like a few people or even hundreds of people, even thousands of people like doing it. You kind of need everybody bought into the same concepts for it to work. It's just such a boring engagement with the subject matter.
Demonizing and castigating us merely because we don't just happily cede to you all the extant power. We're not evil just because we don't believe that you are omniscient. We're not evil just because we don't want you to assume omnipotence and omnipresence too.
True.
There is simply no pathway forward to the green and equitable utopia that necessitates the further impoverishment of the already poor, the compulsion of the working class, or the sacrifice of economic security and opportunity on the food, energy, and housing front. There is simply no pathway forward to the global utopia you hypothetically value that is dependent on force. And even if there was, what gives you the right to enforce your demands on other sovereign citizens equal in value to you? An alternative solution. A better way forward would be to prioritize the problems that beset all of us on this still green, functional, and increasingly abundant planet, with the requisite focus and attention demanded of a true political class elected by the people, capable of and willing to look at everything, trying to fix where necessary, trying to maintain as much freedom and autonomy as possible, and stop simply capitalizing narcissistically on the mere appearance of action, knowledge, and virtue. We should obtain true cooperative consent from those affected, farmers, truckers, working class people, who have turned in irritated desperation to figures such as Trump. And work with them rather than forbidding them with your power or improving them so they will be finally worthy of your time and attention. Help replace dirty energy with clean if you must, but do it on your own dime. And make sure that the results are cheap and plentiful if you want to help the poor and the planet. The warning bells are ringing. Listen to them before they turn into sirens.
Jesus.
We will not advance without resistance through the straits of your enforced privation. We will not allow you to steal and destroy the energy that makes our lives bearable and that produces our food and shelter and housing and the sporadic delights of modern life just to address your existential terror, particularly when it will fail to do so in any case. We will not allow our children to be criticized first for having the temerity to merely exist, and then deprived of the prosperous and opportunity-rich future we strived so hard to prepare for them. We remain unconvinced that your frightened and self-congratulatory moralizing and intellectual pretension, ignorance of the limits of statistics, and misuse of arithmetic. We do not believe, finally, and most absolutely, that your declared emergency and the panic you sow because of it means that you should now be ceded all necessary authority. So, leave us alone, you centralizers of power, you worshippers of Gaia, you sacrificers of the wealth and property of others, you would-be planetary saviors, you Machiavellian pretenders and virtue signalers, objecting to power.
Jesus Christ.
All the while you gathered around you madly. Leave us alone, to prosper or not, as a result of our own choices, as a result of our own actions, in the exercise of our own requisite and irreducible responsibility. Leave us alone, or reap the whirlwind.
Wow.
And watch the terrible destruction of what you purport to save in consequence.
Okay. It was a little dramatic, but okay, dude.